Finishing well. Genesis chapter 24, verses 1 through 8. Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 through 9. Abraham had traveled a long way from his native Ur to Canaan. He arrived in Canaan, left for Egypt, and returned to Canaan in Genesis chapter 12. He fathered a son with a concubine in Genesis chapter 16, fathered a son with his wife in Genesis chapter 21, and fathered 6 more children in Genesis chapter 25 after his wife had died. A man of faith is not perfect in faith, but persistent in faith. How does a person of faith finish well in his relationship to God and with family and neighbors? What are his responsibilities and challenges as he or she ages? What sustains and shows a person's faith through ups and downs and through thick and thin? First, a man of faith is a promise keeper. Genesis chapter 24, verses 1 through 8. Abraham's famous last imperative in the Bible to his servant concluded his life and legacy. Only beware, do not take my son back there in Genesis chapter 24, verses 6 and 8. His other passionate imperatives to his servants were put in Genesis chapter 24, verse 2, and make sure in verse 6, or keep in Hebrew. The master not only pleaded with his servant, but he also put on the servant an oath in verses 3 and 7. Abraham had determined that Isaac's future wife must not be a Canaanite woman in verse 3. Canaan, the Canaanite father, was cursed to be a slave to his brothers in Genesis chapter 9, verses 25 through 27. Abraham's orders to stay in Canaan swayed, shaped, and strengthened the Israelites' mindset toward Israel. Following Abraham's lead, his grandson Jacob's last words to his children were to be buried with his fathers in Canaan in Genesis chapter 49, verses 29 through 32. Second, a man of faith is a pilgrim on earth. Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 through 6. Abraham's testimony to the locals at the death of his wife was, I am an alien and a stranger among you, in Genesis chapter 23, verse 4. Man is but an alien, Psalms 39, verse 12, and a stranger on earth, Psalms 119, verse 19, whose days are like fleeting shadow, Psalms 144, verse 4. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 15. As the gospel song says, this world is not my home. I'm just passing through. People are like grass. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 7. And grasshoppers, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. Here today and gone tomorrow. The length of our days is 70 years. Or 80, if we have the strength. Psalms 90, verse 10. Abraham had had an abundance of servants, gold, and livestock in Genesis chapter 12, verse 16, chapter 13, verse 2, and chapter 20, verse 16. But his only transaction in the Bible was a cave for his family grave, even though he could have bought houses for his 8 sons. Finally, Abraham gave while he was living. Genesis chapter 25, verses 5 and 6. The last thing he wanted to see was his sons, their wives and children, to claim and contest the money, property, livestock, and servants after he was gone. Third, a man of faith is a peacemaker at heart. Genesis chapter 25, verse 9. Abraham valued peace with others in life and brought peace to others in death. He was never confrontational, combative, or critical with others. First, the wise Abraham prevented his sons from continuing the war their respective mothers started. The most beautiful picture in Abraham's death was the sight of Ishmael and Isaac jointly burying their father in Genesis chapter 25, verse 9. Second, Abraham stopped a quarrel his herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen had, and even saved his nephew Lot when he was captured in Genesis chapter 14, verses 11 and 12, for the sake of Lot. Abraham risked annoying God in Genesis chapter 21, verses 30 and 32, but understood more his justice, mercy, and love in Genesis chapter 21, verses 31 through 34. Finally, he made peace with his neighbors. Abraham prayed for Abimelech to be healed in Genesis chapter 20, verses 15 through 18. The words pray in Genesis chapter 20, verse 7 and 17, and heal in Genesis chapter 20, verse 17, made its first entry into the Bible. When a misunderstanding almost erupted again, the 2 men had made a treaty in Genesis chapter 21, verses 25 through 34. He was the assisting, accepting, and affirming type, never the type to annoy, accuse, or anger others. In conclusion, Do you step out in faith and stick to God's promise to be his instrument of peace, righteousness, and blessing? Do you seek God's will? Do you do God's work and follow God's way? Do you strive to finish well? By God's grace, we can triumph over adversities, anxieties, and adversaries in the journey of faith. No one is born to run. From crawling on our knees, we progress to standing on our feet, then walking naturally with poise.